And what is up, everybody? It is Jack Lloyd here, and I'm excited to be talking about a fun little topic. We're talking about objectivism and libertarianism today. And if you're watching this and have not subscribed to the main channel, make sure to go to youtube.com/Jack, J-A-C-K-L-L-O-Y-D, Jack Lloyd. That's the best place to be. Make sure you subscribe, click the notification bell so you get future updates and content and things like that. So I don't want you to miss out, but this is streaming to a bunch of different places. So if you're not there on YouTube, that's the best place for me to see you, especially in the comments. If you want to chime in, I'll definitely be taking a look at some comments later if they're, of course, on point to the topic at hand. Yeah, you could definitely get in there and see what we've got going on here. And for those of you who are watching this on the replay, obviously this is live first, but this will also be up for replay on the regular stream. That is the regular videos as well with my channel. So without further ado, I just want to give a little contextualization to why I'm talking about this topic. The other day, I was on the Rational Egoist with Michael Leibowitz. You can see him here. We had a discussion with a prompt that was which idea is better at fostering, promoting capitalism, objectivism or libertarian voluntarism. In the course of our discussion, we kind of started in the middle of philosophy because we were talking really about ethics and the way, that people behave, codes or principles by which people behave, and how those might foster capitalism. And while I'm not going to be getting, into that debate and discussion, the application, that is something that, we did talk about on that. So it's, something to check out later. I really wanted to get into what we started to dive into later in the show, which was a pivot from the original discussion. We actually started to go back into deeper philosophical concepts with metaphysics and logic, epistemology, the gaining of knowledge. And that is really where I think the objectivist and libertarian voluntarist ideas have some kind of rub up against how they go about things. Because in a lot of ways, obviously, there's a lot of similarities between objectivism and libertarian voluntarism in terms of being skeptical of state power, wanting to maximize, individual consent. There's, limits, of course, past that. Most objectivists, I'd say, are minarchists, although now, there's been some objectivist anarchists out there. I think Liquid Zulu is one of those. So there's definitely a philosophical shift there of some objectivists becoming open to anarchism. But by and large, there's a lot of crossover. And that's why, even though Ayn Rand hated libertarians in name, a lot of people technically identify, with her ideas and individualism and reason being libertarians, because there is a lot of crossover in terms of the ideas and ethics that are shared in terms of respective individual sovereignty. But for the purpose of this discussion, I'm really looking to talk about that key issue that we were discussing that I think didn't really get a good development layer to it to showcase why it is that there is a difference. And, as usual, and I put this in the thumbnail, people will be like, what do you know about Ayn Rand? You've never read anything. I'm like, well, I actually have, the most authoritative summary of her works by Leonard Peikoff, which is, her big heir, her intellectual heir, who, got a lot of, I think maybe even all of her stuff. He wrote, pretty much what many consider to be the summary Bible of her work. Of course, I've read other of her work, including fiction and nonfiction. But this is, by and large, most people will say this is a great way to get into her work in a succinct manner because, he talks about it and cites to her work as well. I had looked at that and other things that she's written and, of course, even said while she was alive. She's been on TV and stuff like that before she passed. And part of my own development and writing was thinking about those things that she said when I came up with my books, Libertarian Voluntarism, Vision for Libertarian Future, and Philosophical Voluntarism. So when I did what I did, it was in the context of having looked at objectivism. It came in context of looking at Mises and Rothbard and natural law theorists, the whole gamut. I mean, I even put some of those people, of course, on the covers. We got Spooner there and Menger, Auburn Herbert, stuff like that. I've looked at many different types of theorists, Stefan Molyneux, Larkin Rose. You go across the gamut, of historical philosophers to modern when it comes to libertarian ideas and, of course, later objectivism. I've studied those things and I've looked at it and I looked for where I thought there was maybe holes or gaps or issues. So when it comes to this contention, and I know we're finally getting there, we are looking at what it is that we are developing ethics from, right? So where are we starting at if we're going to sit there and say, okay, we're going to develop these codes of behavior, and what do we know versus what do we don't know? How do we know what we know? And so on and so forth. So in our discussion, prior, I started to bring up the idea that we have to look at the nature of existence if we're going to sit here and say, what should human beings do or why, and so on and so forth. And the reason why is that knowledge, that is the information that we take into our perceptions, informs us for our thinking skills. And with everything that I'm going to say, my backdrop is always what's called the performative contradiction by virtue of action. So whatever we're going to be talking about in terms of the frameworks, I'm going to posit to you that no matter what, you're going to act in a certain way, even if your words say otherwise, because you can say words, but they don't align with reality, right? If I call myself a dolphin, right, I can say the words that I am a dolphin, but physically you can inspect me and be like, wait, he doesn't have the material composition that makes a dolphin categorically. And, I'm not in the water swimming and I don't have, blowholes as far as I can tell. So there are things that you can empirically look at and say, okay, yeah, you could say the words that this is it, but inescapably, you're going to have a performative contradiction between your words and your actions. In the same way, I can also say that I don't believe in gravity if I, try to make a statement, right? I'm using my words to say, well, I don't think that there's anything that, any force that's pulling down anything called gravity, right? And if I let go, well, the book just dropped, right? And you could call it different words, but this idea there's a force that is pulling mass down, right? That acts independent of my words. So even if I say there's no such thing as gravity, well, too bad for me. There's nothing that I can do to escape that performative contradiction that there is something pulling down in the book. So that is where I come in with these types of ideas to help people understand the differences between someone making a statement versus something that's self-enacting and a performative action of existence. So now that you have these basic ideas down about how I'm going to framework this, I can talk about the nature of existence, right? So this is the biggest of big topics. And we started to go down this path, but it was like, it's too big of a topic to just jump into the middle of a debate about ethics and applications. So I think, a lot of people got lost. But when we're talking about the nature of human existence, right, we can't just simply say, okay, yeah, you're born. And now you're going to say, well, I exist. I think, therefore I am. In other words, performatively, you act as if you exist because you're thinking and you're saying, do I exist? And you're like, oh, yeah, you're talking to others, acting as if they exist and as if you exist to be listened to, right? Performatively. But that's not where technically all of existence begins, because existence, which of course objectivists also agree, it can exist outside of the consciousness, right? There's this idea of constancy, that there's physical objects, regardless of whether your eyes are open or closed, that they exist, or that whether you're alive or dead, that they exist outside of your consciousness, right? That's this idea, someone might say, a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it. Do you hear it, right? It's that idea that, oh, okay, well, regardless of whether a human being's observing or whether there's a human being that has consciousness, there are things that are independent of that. And we can easily accept that, again, by performance of action, right? We can note that there are things that happen. Nobody sees it, but it takes place, right? Tree is up, they observe it, they go away, they come back, the tree, came down, lightning struck or whatever. Maybe there's video cameras that, recorded that. Even though there's no human around or no consciousness, the video captures the event. We can test and see cause and effect with empirical things. And to us, we're like, okay, wow, we can see that consistently across people, right? So we have this idea that existence of things can transcend consciousness, and there's things that come before human beings. So we have to go before that if we're going to have a complete picture of the nature of human beings and their existence and what might inform them for the purpose of perception of reality and the purpose of developing ethics. Well, you'd have to sit there and say, okay, what came before humans, and then what came before that, and was there a beginning to the universe? Is space-time something that has a beginning? Or is it looped infinitely? Or is it itself infinite? Is consciousness something that always existed, as in it's infinite, some form of consciousness? Or did consciousness arise out of unconsciousness? Or was it that consciousness and unconsciousness coexisted to some degree eternally? Or was it that maybe one versus the other is always in some type of flux in a type of multiverse thing. We could sit here and speculate all day as to what those things could be, precisely because we don't have a way to actually test and see what happened. And that's where this gets really interesting, because lots of people in these camps are going to sit there and say, I value reason, I value evidence, I need to see that we can test this and we can replicate this. I'm not going to believe in the mystical, something that has, no way for us to test and see whether something's real. Like if I said, oh, there's like an invisible, alien above my head and you can't touch it, you can't feel it, can't see it, but it's there. I mean, that's great. It could be there, but without a way to empirically test it within our realm of capabilities as humans, we don't take that as a default assumption. But that we don't take something as a default assumption, in other words, we don't just simply believe, okay, if I don't have evidence for something for sure, then we don't go and sit there and say, well, we do have the evidence of something else that we don't know for sure, right? You can't use ambiguity to both validate a concept and also invalidate. That this is the tension that we have between, especially if you're talking about, the existence of God, non-existence of God, which of course objectivists reject God. This is where you have that debate going on, because in my opinion, which I agree with, the objectivists would rightly say, you can say, okay, there's some creator, this consciousness or this or whatever, this type of thing, but there's no way to materially prove to humans that this thing is existing and acting in a way that humans can replicate for themselves and show others. People can speculate about it. They could say, yeah, maybe there is this, Brahman, or maybe there's, Allah, there, is Yahweh. But without a way for human beings to actually test that and demonstrate that and show it in, in consistent empirical reality, there's no way to assume that by default. There's no way to say, okay, well, inherently this must be. And again, why? This was something we talked about on our show. I said for things to be something that's automatic and default in terms of, okay, you can't help but accept it, it has to be self-enacting, right? So like what I talked about with the gravity thing before, right? The gravity is self-enacting. I could say, okay, I don't believe in a force that pulls down on things. Oh, cool. Well, too bad. It doesn't matter what I say. The force exists and exerts independently. Ethics don't. Ethics don't exert themselves. Human beings have to adopt them. And, it's very simple to see because, as we talked about before there, if someone commits an act of murder or theft or rape or whatever, they don't automatically get struck by lightning or die or something bad happens to them because of that. There's tons of people through human history who have done horrendous things in terms of violence and causing people suffering. And not only did they get away with it, but they were enriched by it. It could be kings of the past who lived off plunder and they conquered people. They mass murdered people. They lived to an old age and they died. And they literally lived on the high hog till then. Those ethics, you may say, hey, I think it's wrong to murder if you develop that ethic, doesn't magically suddenly cause a king to go, I'm dead now. It doesn't. It's not self-enacting. So that's that problem that we have when we're thinking about the development of ethics and having to deal with the difficulty of the unknown, because the unknown could technically inform ethics and perception. And I brought in the Matrix example, not for the sake of saying that we're in a simulation, but to just prove the point, the theoretical point, that if you knew a greater truth about what was going on, that would affect your perceptions of reality. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Matrix, but I think many people are because it's so popularly, so culturally popular, and a group of individuals discover that they're in a simulation by a computer on a tyrannical futuristic world where robots are ruling and they're using human beings for energy, but they're keeping them alive by connecting to their brain and making them think that they're in the world at a certain period. To the people who are in the world, they think it's very real. They think that their simulated reality is the true nature of existence. And everything they do affects them in that computer coding reality. And if they even die in that simulation, they die in their, real bodies that are outside the simulation. So all that to say is that this is an intriguing possibility of thought more than ever, especially when we look at the, development of technology and the merging of human beings with machines and the possibility of how AI may integrate with that, with virtual reality or augmented reality or, Neuralink and things like that, and how far that can go. But again, just because that might be a possibility doesn't mean that we assume it without reason and evidence. This is, again, where we that is me and libertarian voluntarists might align with objectivists. We don't assume the truth of a hypothetical that could be true, but we don't have evidence for it. We don't say, well, I'm going to live as if that's real without that reasoned evidence that we can consistently show for ourselves. And so that is, where I start to differentiate from objectivists and saying that we take by default of our existence, that is by our actions, we take this assumption that we exist and we believe that other things are existing around us with scarcity. And this happens performatively just by the virtue of someone talking to others or interacting in their environment. I bring this up in my book, specifically, reminding people, and it's actually a push back against the postmodernists, which I think when we had our debate, I don't think he got it at first, that I'm not a postmodernist, because it's difficult to always be in that mentality that, you're subjectivist or you're an objective truth. You're either firm in reality or you're postmodernist. And it's like, no, there is a bridging of the gap there when you have to admit that, okay, there's things you just don't know and you have to just work from there. So that's what I brought to the table, and that's what I was bridging in my book between objectivism and other ideologies, where the objectivists want to assert something as being absolutely true, where it does become a matter of faith because they don't have the ability to actually see, observe, and repeat scientifically the conditions of humans' existence and what caused the universe to exist and what may have come before that, or what is outside of space-time, what other possibilities there are. They can't functionally get rid of any other possible perception simply because they don't have the empirical tools to do so. But again, that doesn't mean you assume the hypothetical. It just means you say, okay, there is a difficulty that we don't have that, and so it's just a black box. So then what do? We work with the best of what we can empirically, and by our performance, we rest on the idea that we act as if we exist, that to speak and to have a consciousness expression of saying, oh, I'm thinking, that presupposes a consciousness with which to think. So performatively, people act as if they exist, and it makes sense. Okay, there is an existence by default. You can't escape that. It doesn't tell you the full nature of that existence, right? It doesn't tell you, okay, you are or are not in the matrix. It doesn't tell you whether your perception of what is reality as perceived by you is accurate, right? You can say you're an objectivist and you believe in reasoned evidence, but that doesn't automatically give you perfect perception, total knowledge, or make you right or wrong. You could be very wrong while believing in what you call objective truth. And I mentioned that too in our show debate, that if you brought together all the people who claimed that their truths are objective, they would have disagreements about what those core things are, because you'd have religious people who would say, yes, there's objective truth, and the Bible says what that objective truth is, or the Quran says what it is, or the Tanakh says what it is, whatever religious text. You might have someone who is a-religious, and they say, yes, there's objective reality, and it's only that which is, by reason and evidence, and so on and so forth, even though they themselves don't have the totality of all knowledge to say for certain that their perceptions as is 100% what the reality is. So all we are doing here is admitting those gaps and those areas where we lack knowledge, and then just saying, but that's okay, because your performance inherently cannot escape acting as if you exist, as if you believe you are material, that you matter to be reasoned with. And the active argument does that. Argumentation is itself the act of someone wanting you to believe they exist. They're trying to get your attention. They're trying to condition your psychology to become like theirs by arguing with you. They're trying to basically mimetically copy their values and ideas. Like, yo, become like me, become like me, become like me, right? That's what argument is. Someone trying to convince you of their psychology and have you mimic them. So these features of thinking through what it is that is the nature of existence and our limitations, and thinking through then what we do experience and what we do act upon by default, inescapably so, helps us be able to move forward on why reason, evidence, and relying on our perceptions as best as we can. We do, in coordination with others, because we talk with each other and we try to confirm our realities. We try to say, hey, did you see this? Right? You can talk about this in terms of science, right? One scientist tests for something and says, okay, I think I see a cause-effect relationship. Another scientist somewhere else says, okay, let me test this and see if I can do it. Another scientist says, okay, let me test this and see if I can get the same result. So in other words, human beings are in a constant state of confirmation with each other, trying to discern the rules of the cause and effect about what they perceive as reality. And again, those rules, and in terms of what the cause and effect are material in terms of action. We can act on those. We can make them repeat. But just like what I talked about with the Matrix example, the Matrix can have a code, and you can see the code, and you can even act on the code. And that code could be consistent. But it doesn't mean that that code is ultimate reality, or that those properties couldn't be changed. Just like, a string theory situation where it's like what would happen in it, under different code premises. So I know this is, getting to that next level stuff with like physics and thinking about the possibilities, but just because there are those possibilities, again, doesn't automatically mean, well, therefore we live on those possibilities. No, I only live on that which I have the empirical reason evidence for. There's things that, in reality, I do to a degree take faith on, you could say, like, for example, the concept of love, right? Love might be evidenced in someone's actions. Someone might buy you gifts, they give you hugs and kisses, they dote on you. But fundamentally, unless you have a way to see inside the mind with psychology, what is expressed as the totality of someone's commitment and intent and care in love is itself, ethereal. It's something that is not, a material physical thing. They're like, okay, we can study this under a microscope and test to love. We only assume that love based on words and actions, and only the individual within their consciousness has that internal expression knowledge for themselves. Again, one day there may come a time when the brain could be analyzed to such a degree that the signals of love could be maybe even found in a locus where it's like, oh, here's the definition of what love is. But again, that doesn't necessarily, give us the ultimate nature of what that consciousness expression is. There's still a black box aspect with that. And of course, with that comes, into the questions of things like free will, right? Because there's people who try to say, oh, well, there is no free will whatsoever. There's limited free will, or there's total free will. There's a spectrum of things too. And I talk about that in my books. I mentioned specifically that, free will, in terms of what I define it as, is that people have a certain parameter set of ideas and actions that they are able to take on within their biology and psychology, right? So a very simple logical statement here is you can't take action on an idea you can't think of in a given time, right? If your brain couldn't think of it, in that time, well, then you couldn't take the action in that time. Or another way of framing that that's kind of fun to think about is, imagine you had to randomly pick a word out of the English language within 10 seconds. You had 10 seconds to come up with a word. You could have, a big dictionary with you, right? But if your memory doesn't have memorized every single dictionary word, sure, there's a greater possibility of words you can pick from, but your mind can only pick from what it is that you know, right? If you didn't know that there's a certain word, well, your ability to choose in that moment is going to be limited to your lexicon. So that's what I think when I think of free will, is that we have a degree of will within a certain bound of parameters. And within that, depending on how advanced your prefrontal cortex is, you can, have more or less, ideas and thoughts and things that you can do, fundamentally because your brain is technically made of multiple parts, and those parts actually can counter signal each other. Your amygdala, your reptilian brain has impulsive things. Your prefrontal cortex modulates that. So you're even communicating and having competing different interests in your own brain. So it's an interesting, kind of meld of things to think about. But it's again, something that is difficult to know the true fullest nature of if you don't have the ultimate knowledge of all what is consciousness, of what all came in space-time and what it all means. You're limited to your empirical means because as a human being, that's what you got. You have your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your nose. You have tools that can translate things outside of the normal spectrum of human observation experience and translate that to something that you can see, just like there's wavelengths of light, there's things that your eye can't naturally see, but you can use a device to translate those wavelengths into something that visualizes for yourself on the visible light spectrum. So, we have a wide range of scientific tools that enables us to see beyond what our normal faculties have. But those limitations are still just that. And to an extent, that's kind of what it is that we're talking about when we talk about the nature of the universe coming about and what that might implicate, or what may have been there, conscious or unconscious, or what may have happened in terms of humanity arising. Fundamentally, we only have a certain set of tools as is, and there could be more. And in order to get to more, we have to develop tools that might get us closer there. But without omniscience, that is the totality of all knowledge and information in the universe, we might still always be missing something that affects perception and reality. And that's just, the nature of that thing. It's just kind of tough. You know what I mean? It's like this, it's like the concept of being in the Matrix, right? You could be like, I know everything in the Matrix, right? Maybe you know everything in terms of what is in the simulation. But if you didn't know that you were in the simulation, well, cool, you've learned a lot, but you're still missing that one key thing that would totally change your perception of what is really going on. Even though you see the buildings, even though this, that, if you don't know that your body is actually elsewhere, it would change everything about the nature of what it is and what you're doing. But that wouldn't change your ability to recognize that you exist in some form just by virtue of questioning your consciousness. It wouldn't change that you could take what you know and develop ethics from there. It wouldn't change. You could sit there and say, okay, what are the minimums of my action? What are the relationships that I wish to create? And how do I want to either add or take away from, force against others, which libertarian voluntarists want to reduce conflict over scarce resources. So, that's something that you have to fundamentally come to terms with. And so that's really where this difference is between the objectivists who want to say to, a faith, in my opinion, a faith level, this is all there is, right? This is all there is, as opposed to libertarian voluntarists who say, well, there's a limitation on knowing what all there is, but given these limitations, here is the best of what we can find and come up with the tools that we have. We can find that we exist by performative action of consciousness. It seems that the nature of discussing consciousness is itself a performance of saying that we, exist. It's like I have to have a consciousness with which to say, hey, I'm thinking, and oh, okay, I guess then there's something to have come out of that. And then the actions of argumentation, engaging with those around you. Again, it suggests by performance that you wish to act as if others exist, that you are engaging with others, wanting them to treat you as if you exist. And that when it comes to scarcity, you act within that, right? I put this in my book as well. It's just kind of like a funny test thing. It's, anyone who says that, they don't believe in these things, just like the gravity thing, I say, okay, well, we can solve this with one simple test. How about you go to a 30-story building and you jump off and you see, shout out, oh, my existence doesn't matter, and we'll all observe what happens. It's not that difficult to see what the result, will be. If someone does that, it's not going to be very good for them. Of course, it might, not feel too good, to say the least. But most people are going to say to you, you're crazy. Of course, I'm not jumping off a building, right? Performatively, people know, okay, yeah, no, I've seen other things fall off buildings, seen videos that, no, I don't want to smash my body on the ground. That does not look fun. So again, performance, right? Performance of believing in scarcity and rules of reality and order. And so people work on that. And that's okay. It's perfectly fine that that we lack knowledge in many areas, but then work forward on the best that we have. Just saying that you take that as an as an assumption, and that your knowledge, you're accepting it. In other words, you're saying, yes, I'm not perfect as a human, but I'm going to accept as best I can that my senses are working unless shown otherwise, right? And that, it's just like a situation with a madman. If you have a madman who's on a remote island and they don't know that they're mad, well, how do they tell reality from what is just their distortion in their senses, right? They'd have a really bad time. They'd be like, oh, wow, there's like a giant duck floating in the ocean. But what they're seeing is not reality. Their senses are off. They have schizophrenia. They would need a second party to come in and say, hey, you think you see a duck out in the ocean, but there isn't a duck, a giant duck, rubber ducky. So that is that limitation, right? Is that in the process of human beings trying to relate and trying to discern reality as best as possible, they're constantly looking to each other to validate their sanity, right? The idea is that each person is trying to say, am I sane? Am I sane? Am I sane? Are you seeing this? Are you seeing this? And that is very good, in terms of if you're using the scientific method to show cause-effect relationship, that can be very beneficial. It can be very detrimental if a group psychology has, some type of mass formation psychosis over something that's wrong, that is not cause and effect relationship. Think like the Aztecs believing that human sacrifices is going to control the weather in the cosmos, right? Group think, hey, everybody believes that sacrificing people is adjusting the stars and bringing good rain. Yeah, well, unfortunately, that wasn't the empirical relation, but they acted as if it was, and lots of people died under those pretenses because they each believed in their own delusions, even though they may otherwise have some cause and effect reasonability for other things. They might be like, oh, I need to eat. I know how to hunt and I can get food. They were insane. That is disconnected from reality and cause and effect on human sacrifice affecting the weather. So that is, an easy example to look at, but you go through most of human history and these types of mystical thinkings are rampant. They're not, something that is the norm to have the otherwise of people valuing reason, evidence, and not assuming mystical as the default truth. Much of human history is the mystical is the default, right? There's, polytheism and there's these different gods and they affect whether we have, good weather or violence, non-violence, or whether someone loves you or not, or the, astrology and the stars are going to determine whether you're going to have, a better day today or whether you're going to have success at your job today or, whatever superstitious thing you can imagine, across the board, that was pretty much the norm for human history. So coming out of that and getting people to say, okay, I'm going to default to reason, evidence, and empirical thinking for believing truth from falsehood, or at least, if we were to be, accurately say, we're saying what we perceive as truth within our ability to reason, until we have that, we have a lot of dangerous outcomes with people acting in ways that are, very often violent and dangerous to others because of their mystical thinkings. So the development of ethics past that point, of course, is just its own special study, because with all that in mind, it's not self-enacting. No objectivist can say, I say objectivism is truth, and now boom, you hit a Pentecostal preacher, and all of a sudden you see reality, and all it's like some cosmic thing. You're like, whoa, I can see the geometric shapes of the universe, and I can suddenly know what is true and false on anything, and I have an IQ of 1 million. It's just not how it works. It doesn't magically impute knowledge, doesn't magically impute accuracy. So where that leaves us, and this gives us that, where we're talking about versus objective truth, as you might say, versus subjectivism. I say, and I'm bridging this gap here, is that as we act, we find that there are certain rules that seem to have consistency and constancy regardless of human experience and expression. We see that in what's called metaphysical logic. That is, it's ideas about cause-effect relationships or conditions that could be mapped out in reality. In other words, we can express these things very often, and people who come up with metaphysical ideas can take those and try to show those to people, whether it's in drawings or creating logic form and syllogisms. But people don't, by default, have those things tell them what they ought to do with their lives, right? Expressing a law of identity like A is A, like something that is perfectly itself is equal to itself, right? That is a metaphysical logic, right? Two perfect apples equal to each other. That is a form of an identity, but that doesn't tell you what you should do with the apple, right? Apple equals apple. Okay, they equal each other. Cool. Well, what should I do with this apple? Should I eat it? Should I throw it at somebody? Should I give it to an animal? Should I make apple pie? Should I donate it to a homeless person? That's all subjective. That's an individual chooses what to do past the point of apple. So we are in that business, past that point of recognizing that subjective values are going to determine the outcomes of human action. People are going to subjectively choose what it is that they do past the point. And even if there is ultimate objective truth, right? Like, let's just say there's no matrix, there's no whatever. Let's just say, just for simplest argument reference, all there is this empirical reality. We die, no reincarnation, no afterlife, whatever, right? Okay, cool. That's all you got. That still, in and of itself, doesn't mean that your perceptions about those things or what you might be saying as truth in terms of cause and effect is itself true. Your words, like I talked about before, I could say I'm a dolphin. Okay, cool. Is that in concordance with reality, empirical reality? No. So no matter what, we are always in this discussion. We're always having discourse with individuals trying to figure out truth from falsehood, discussing with each other what their perceptions are, what their memory holds, what they're able to see in cause and effect relationships. And with that, the hope that each person, they hope, or each person individually wishes that they really have a sane mind, that their mind really is seeing what's in front of them as true as possible, and that their ultimate understanding of reality is as true as possible. And again, there are aspects to that hold true in terms of like these scientifically shown cause and effect relationships within the bounds of our consciousness and the reality that we are situated in. It just doesn't tell us either the origins of everything, nor does it tell us what we should do with that, right? And this is like that subjective value calculation, like the economics and the economic calculation problem, right? And prices, as Macy's says, right? Because you could have a piece of steel, a bar of steel. Cool, there's a bar of steel. We have objectively settled that this is indeed, chemically, composition-wise, a piece of steel. You hold it, yes. I hold it, yes. Okay. We close our eyes, feel it, up, still there even with our eyes closed. Oh, we put it in a box. All right, we're going to leave it there for a year. We come back a year later, open the box. The bar is still there. Okay. We accept that this has constancy. We accept that this object extends beyond human consciousness. Great. Who should use it and for what? Just because it exists doesn't inform you as to whether that piece of steel should be used in a bridge, should be used in a car, should be used for a piece of medical equipment, should be, thrown in a river. It doesn't tell you any of that. Human beings subjectively look at things and they analyze things and they decide based on their own purposes what it is that they wish to do with it. And so that is where I also, have this kind of different direction where it shouldn't be really a contention, but it seems like it is sometimes with objectivists that these ideas, since they're not self-executing, are products of people talking with each other in adoption. Because you're not born, and of course, I mean, that would be pretty impressive, but no one is born with all these ideas in their head. And if you can prove that, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see a child born with the entirety of Ayn Rand's consciousness fully finished by the time she was dead. But no one is born with even those ideas, just like thinking about the nature of self and reason and taking, precepts and stuff like that. So, and conceptualizations. So fundamentally, you're going to have to be talking with others about these ideas and reasoning through it yourself and developing it. And people don't, by default, have those tools right off the bat. I mean, maybe you might be better at it than others. Like you can start to figure things out, in terms of just developing your own ideas. But the idea that someone inherently develops magically all ideas within logic, within epistemology, within metaphysics, within ethics, just out of absolutely nothing and nowhere, it's just kind of silly, because every single person who is in these types of fields themselves engages with others. They debate ideas. They read other people's books. They look at the literature, as to when they were born. Just like, even Nikola Tesla, who's, was a brilliant scientist. He himself studied people who were, electrical engineers past. He himself was getting degrees and studying and learning from others and developing new things. So, these ideas don't magically spring. They come from people making discoveries and building on discoveries over time, sharing that knowledge, refining their thinking with others through debate and discussion, and becoming better at understanding the basics to logic and group theory, set theory, thinking about syllogisms, inductive, deductive reasoning, logical fallacies, all that good stuff. These are things that people, develop over time by learning from others and developing with others. And they are not going to automatically apply themselves to people. No matter what, you're going to be having to teach others these things and sharing these things and refining these things over time. And even people who learn them well can make a mistake, whether it's, careless or just a misconception. You can just make a mistake in application, just like you take a test and you got a question wrong, for whatever reason. So that is why I think it's extraordinarily important to understand these knowledge gaps and to understand where these differences are, even though there's a lot of crossover in terms of developing these ideas and thinking through these ideas. So I will take a look here really quick at some comments here. I just want to see if there's anything I can address while I'm here. So Alpha Pro says, deep questions. Yes, definitely. Free Marketeer says, I agree. Lots of people are wrong, even the ones who claim to be objectivists. I think that's beside the point. I think the point is you can do integration induction to find out bigger truths that go beyond the senses. Didn't Copernicus also use integration to theorize his new model? His maths were further off than the other models going around at the time. He was right there with wrong maths. So, inductive reasoning here, for those who are not familiar, is that you're looking at a situation and you're making a generalization from observations, right? So, for example, maybe you're at a lake and you notice that there's a lot of white birds that are hanging out at the lake. You're like, this lake must be home to white birds, because you're out, canoeing, paddling, whatever, and you see there's just tons of white birds around. Now, that's an induction you can make by observation, but it may be the case that those birds are migratory. They're not there all the time. They actually are just stopping on their way somewhere else, right? So it's not really their home. It's just a resting point. So again, you could take evidence, make inductions, but as always, ideas are subject to further falsification. So, it's got to be something that is always, under review of further new information. That's kind of the point that I was making about the nature of existence and what comes before that, is that knowledge would have an impact later on ethics if you were to know that. It may not be possible to have omniscience, but it's possible that new information about those things may influence your idea about what you are actually perceiving and or what you do about it. So, Brian says creation is self-evident. Well, creation is, in terms of people creating, is self-evident. The difficulty is knowing what would have exactly happened at whatever you'd consider the beginning of space-time or the universe. Without an empirical way to test and observe and be there, unless you have a time machine or a way to replicate it and show it again and again, just like you could, in a closed system for a chemical reaction, you don't have that knowledge. And that's just it. That's why, when it comes to religion, it's called faith. Faith is the belief in the unseen because you haven't seen it. Whether you're atheist or theist, you haven't seen it. So that's why it's literally something we have to contend with and say to ourselves, okay, well, we really haven't seen it. So what are we going to do about that? And then depending on which way you're going, some people say, I haven't seen it, but I'm choosing to believe in this religion. Some people say, I haven't seen it, therefore I don't believe in God, atheist side or agnostic side. So that's why this discussion is so important. Okay. And let me see here. There seems like I'm an objectivist. You've mischaracterized that last claim about objectivism. I'm not sure which that last claim is, but if you throw in there, I'll definitely address it. Let me see. Yeah, if you give me you're mischaracterizing objectivist via collectivism. Well, you tell me what I'm specifically mischaracterizing as I've read and understand, and if you let me know, I might be able to actually address what the specific part is. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't have to worry too much about mischaracterizing objectivism in terms of at least just talking about the beginning ideas here when we're talking about what is the effect of the unknown on the development of ethics, because that is something that is very clear and has to actually be fleshed out, and it can't be hand waved, which is essentially what many objectivists are doing. They would be hand waving that and saying, well, we have existence, by default, see that, you're able to talk and you're able to reason. So existence must precede, that consciousness expression. To which I say, yeah, by performance, yes, it appears to be so. I need a conscious thing with which to express. A book does not have consciousness. So from what we observe and how we act, I do assume that, of course. But that doesn't tell you about ethics, which is what our discussion was the other day. Just because we're at the point of, yes, we agree we exist. Okay, well, what should we do about it? Okay, well, now we're getting into that is-ought fallacy. Just because something is doesn't tell you what something ought to be, because it doesn't self-enact. Ethics don't self-enact. We are stuck having to reason with those things with our subjective perceptions and abilities within the constructs of our outer limitations, right? The gravity and everything else in physics. We are stuck having to reason those things, and we argue with others. And even amongst those people, the objectivists or people who claim that they have the objective truth, disagree with each other, right? They subjectively disagree. Oh, objectivism is a closed system. Objectivism is an open system. Objectivism is only what Ayn Rand said. Objectivism can be added to by latecomers. These are real contentions within objectivism. So it's that the ideas here are, no matter what, they're not going to be self-enacting for the truth of the matter when it comes to ethics. Ethics are subjectively adopted, they're subjectively argued with, and we can use principles of reason and evidence looking at scarcity to think about what rules, if adopted, would reduce conflicts over scarce resources, which, that at least was the beginning sort of discussion the other day. And, that we did cover more in depth. So I won't rehash that, just watch our debate there. But the issues there are really important to flesh out if you actually want to have a ethics system that is inherently contradictory and then escalates more force, going after. So, Francis says, I 100% agree that you have to convince people. You're saying objectivism says otherwise. So I'm not saying objectivism says otherwise to the effect that that objectivists don't think that they have to evangelize. They think they have to evangelize. They just think that their objectivism is itself a self-enacting truth. That is that all truths of objectivism are self-enacting in terms of describing what it is that you ought to do with your life. In other words, the whole metaphysics to ethics is a continuum that informs it on its own, even though what I'm contending is that the lack of knowledge is an issue that has to be admitted. And then later on, the focus on reason and evidence in and of itself doesn't tell you what you ought to do. It's this idea of selfishness, which she talks about. She writes in a bunch of different virtues that she just develops, but it's purely her subjective wishes. None of these virtues about capitalism that she says are in of themselves self-enacting. Just like you can, as I mentioned before, you could have really bad Babel kings and stuff like that plunder. They don't automatically enact upon themselves. She is attempting to weave it in where it's like, no, this is the mandatory conclusion, but it's not. That's basically what that would boil down to. But again, we wouldn't disagree on the outcomes. That's by and large, what I mean? Libertarian voluntarists align with objectivists 95% of the time in terms of valuing reason and valuing individual autonomy and valuing free trade and respect to consent. We're going to agree here, almost always up to a point. Big L libertarians, which I'm not a big L libertarian, small libertarian, but they would agree on the minarchist side. But then beyond that, then you'd have a new schism, as I had mentioned before, the anarcho-objectivists, the new wave. So the anarcho-objectivists would be the new, splinter there, because Ayn Rand wasn't technically an ANCAP, even though she was so close. She was still rationalizing the state because it's at the end of the day, it's like any other intellectual journey, right? There's comfort zones that you can reach within a time period. And I think, getting to be ANCAP is pretty tough. It takes a lot of intellectual rigor and ethical consistency to really drive in on saying, hey, this way to organize people at its inception is unethical, and to really challenge that it is tough. It's a very tough thing to do, especially considering how much people, are brought up and raised up in government, and it's so normed. It's kind of like the people who would be abolitionists, against chattel slavery. If you were trying to be that in the 1500s, so good luck, right? You're going against huge cultural social norms that don't support that one bit. It's people would say, oh, it could never be this way. This is just what it has to be. It's a necessary evil or God ordained slavery, So it's very tough. Silvar says, is this live and not a short? Yes, this is live. So Jonathan Theater says, what are your thoughts on the scientific method being a basic building block for reasoning, rationality, and other fields of philosophy? So the scientific method is a means to helping oneself make sure that they have eliminated confounding variables, that is, influences in a causal relationship. So the scientific method is an excellent tool. And actually, I do talk about it in philosophical voluntarism as a powerful means for people to try to root out other influences in a cause-effect relationship to make sure that what it is that they are seeing is truly cause and effect. Of course, scientific method is only as good as how much you can control for and how well you can really test something and repeat it. But the framework, of course, is a brilliant intellectual development and has wildly advanced our understanding of what we perceive in the world, what we see in the world with empirical reality and cause and effect relationships. So he says, is a STEM education necessary for truly understanding the nature of reality? You don't have to be in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and you don't have to specifically have a major in that or something like that. But more so, I would just say that understanding, what might be, some people call it the trivium, where we're talking about logic and rhetoric and philosophy itself in terms of the branches of philosophy, right? Metaphysics, epistemology. We have, ethics, logic, and axiology. Those are some of the big ones. So, those things are certainly going to be useful to an individual to help them determine what is a causal relationship versus what isn't. People are still, human mind's prone to error. They're still going to have mistakes. They're still going to make mistakes in what they do. But the closer someone comes to valuing reason and evidence, and the more that they apply that in their life, I would say that the more likely they are going to be able to reach their goals. And that's what it boils down to, is that subjectively, each person is trying to reach, his or her goals. If you're trying to, purchase a new tablet and you want to get it from Best Buy, it costs $400. You're like, okay, I want to achieve this goal. You save up $100 a week for that, and then you have enough money to purchase it, right? You took an action. It was rationally related to the effect of you being able to afford your tablet, and you buy it. Those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. Is your belief system actually describing what is cause and effect. And the better you are at identifying cause and effect, the more successful you will potentially be at achieving your goals. And so, the more distant you are from reality, the more difficult it will be to achieve your goals, because the things you think you're doing to achieve your goals might be taking you in a different direction, or they might be harming you, or completely destructive or disruptive of those ends. So that's why those things should be valued if you value using reason and evidence to get to your goals, right? You want to value learning about basics of philosophy and logic, and thinking through the scientific method, what that means, how to determine whether someone else has the ability to meaningfully convey information. Because that's the other difficulty for a lot of people, is that they have to rely on third-party experts, because an individual cannot perform every single scientific experiment that was done for all time, for all things. It's just, you don't have the time in your life to actually replicate everything. So at some points, you're stuck having to rely on the expertise of others. And sometimes it's super easy. Like, you make a recipe and you're like, yeah, I got this recipe on, whatever, some cooking website, and you made some delicious cookies, and it's easy because, you got the ingredients, and boom, you have cookies. Like, wow, scientific method. I use this. I followed the instructions. I tested this in controlled conditions, and I got cookies, right? Sometimes it's way crazier. It's like, okay, how are we going to make this quantum computer work and make it applicable for people? Way heavier, physics knowledge and deep understanding of chemistry to make those things work. So it's really important for people to understand those things and to learn about those things if they wish to better their lives, using reason, evidence, for empirical reality. Obviously, there's going to be things that get in the way of those things. Like in life, there's sometimes chance things that hurt you. Someone hits you as you're at a stoplight, nothing to do with you, and you get hurt, or accidents happen. But if you're able to better meter your decisions by looking at true cause and effect relationships and understand habits that help you stay focused and do things that are, keeping you on track for your goals, and you're going to be much more equipped to handle the difficulties of life. The people who are in a reactive state where they're, because of trauma, because of poor modeling, is, when they were young people, they had poor ways of frameworks of thinking modeled to them by parents or outside people. People have to come out of those things and undo those ways of thinking, whether it's just silly mantras or mystical thinking about cause and effect. They have to undo that to get out of those things and then move in a direction where they're able to better, perceive and interpret reality. So, yeah, Silver says, have you seen Liquid Zulu's use of objectivism? I saw a little bit of that, but I mean to actually watch the whole thing eventually. I was watching a little bit, and I that's what I was talking to about just the other day, actually, and just today as well now, is that there's even that new schism, because it used to be Ayn Rand objectivism minarchy, and now you have objectivist anarchism, which I like. But Jonathan, thank you so much for the wonderful explanation. That's wonderful. Okay, so Fred says, I will say this. Your conversation, Michael, has brought you to using the things Michael said in the context of a debate as a straw man for objectivism and objectivists. You say objectivism says X, which it doesn't, and then proceed to say things that an objectivist would agree with. So that comment's too much for me to unpack, because, well, I can agree with you that Michael Leibowitz is definitely not the end-all be-all of objectivism. It's kind of funny because Kinsella, who I love, was even debating him right back afterward on some of his words on Twitter right after our debate. And that kind of just highlights what I was talking about, is that even within objectivism, you have people say, oh, you didn't use the right framing for this, or didn't use the right word, or Ayn Rand wouldn't have said it this way, and this, that. And it's like, you can do it all day. You can sit there and say, you're not really saying what Ayn Rand really thinks, or this, that. So what I try to do is I try to, do my best to present what it is that I have that I can speak authoritatively to, being the originator of that. And then I focus on what it is that either there is a clear, culturally speaking, division on. This is from debating many different people who are objectivists or reading different literature. I take a look at the totality, right? What are common sayings? The same thing happens too, when I debate with, like Marxists, for example, right? You'll talk to someone who's like, they claim they're a commie, but they're like, well, I'm not this kind of commie. I'm this kind of commie, going down the spectrum from ancoms to tankies. And you can sit there and say, well, Marx said this, and Stalin said this, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, there's these certain core tenets that we're really trying to drive at. And when we're talking through those things, I'm just going to use the colloquials, and I'll address people where they have their own statements. So I'm not, I don't really care, that's why it's just like, just like you're talking about Marxists, you're like, what's private versus personal property? And then someone will say, there's no such thing as personal property. It's just, there's private property, then communal goods. And, you can do it all day with the language and obfuscation with language. And we just need to be specific about the things that, what is someone claiming about the reality and what they do or don't know? Forget the terms, forget conceptualization, forget existence even for a second. What do you know or not know about what may be at the beginning and or before space-time? How would you know that? How would you prove that? How would you show, right? You can just start there, and then you're going to either see someone's a madman or they admit the truth that they don't know. Because again, anybody can say anything. I can claim to you right now, I was there at the beginning of time, and it was a giant purple bird that created the universe. Okay, cool. I just made an assertion. Do I have evidence of this? No. Can I take you back in time? No. Doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. All that matters is who I'm talking with and what it is that they're claiming about their knowledge or lack of knowledge, and what they can build on from there. And so, to me, that's what really matters at the end of the day is getting each individual person to flesh out their own ideas, because, even your, average objectivist still is going to have their own, because Anne Wright, she wrote so much, right? Let's be real. Like, nobody has her entire collection of works memorized perfectly, like it's like a mental Wikipedia, like absolutely word for word, like Rain Man or something. And even Rain Man can only do 80-90% of books. People have, even when they take in Ayn Rand's work, they have their own sometimes deviancies from how she frames things, or just slight misapplication, slight misinterpretation, this or that. So I'm always dealing with individuals. I'm always dealing with the subjective nuance of whoever claims to be an adherent of whatever ideology it is. So I just always have to break it down and ask them, okay, how do you define this word yourself? What do you think about this philosophy or philosopher? How do you use this application? And then we're in the business of argumentation. So it's a good thing, though. It's, the more that we have those types of conversations with others, the better it fleshes out our own thinking. It gets us to think through, how do we define things as an individual? How does the other person define it? And can we find common ground, right? If we can get past, like, I define this way, they define this, like, okay, well, do we agree on this concept? And we can move past maybe labels and stuff like that. We get a lot of common ground, which is why, I generally get along with objectivists for a large portion of things. Like, we were both like, yeah, we agree with reason, accepting existence as the default, and that we operate on that, and we value that, cause-effect relationship. And we don't think that, and truth, in terms of certain types of metaphysical truths and physical empirical truths, that those are subjective. Like, I agree there that there are things with constancy that don't magically change just because you close your eyes and say, I wish, this water bottle is really a bird. Like, it that's cool. You can play fantasy all you want, and you can pretend in your head. You can use words to obfuscate reality, but you can't, by word, change that reality. And that's where we get the difference between the sanity and madness, right? How close are you to perceiving and reasoning through and processing what you take in your perceptions and seeing the cause and effect relationships? The closer you are to that being accurate in terms of what is the actual truth of the situation, the more sane you are. The further you are from that, the more insane you are, the more disconnected from reality you are. So, that's why it's something that we're in a constant, so you could say state of being and doing. We're constantly trying to find ourselves becoming more sane. We're constantly trying to see how, by virtue of validation, empirically and with discussion with others, what we think about the world is true and manifests consistently. That, I trust that when I sit in this chair, it's not going to just suddenly turn into a pile of goo, because the materials and the properties have that constancy, regardless of whether I imagine it becoming, a bunch of, slime or something. I'm, fall into it, right? That's what enables us to act on the world, is that assumption that those things are fixed. They do abide by rules. And even if we don't know the ultimate truth of what it is, we can trust in that. We can trust in that, consistency and constant presence. So let's see. So yeah, it seems like, let me see here. Oh, okay. Here says, forgive me if this has been mentioned already, but Roy Child's An Open Letter to Ayn Rand is the classic statement of the anarchist implications of objectivism. No, I didn't mention that yet. And I'm not sure whether Liquid Zulu mentioned that either, but now I'm going to have to watch the rest of his show about that and see if he brings it up as well. So I think that's it. We covered those basics. Obviously, I didn't cover every single thing in philosophy and the implications of this, that. I just wanted to home in on very carefully those little minor differences between what most people would say, objectivists think about or say would or wouldn't affect ethics, and what libertarian voluntarists do. Because I think that the conversation I had with Michael, again, that was on this the show that we had on his Rational Egoist, it got a little bit discombobulated because we started in the middle first and then went back, and now we're just trying to chase how do you know what you know, and keep going from there. And that's its own big discourse, which, we just had. So I hope that now that people really understand where I'm coming from, and they don't think about, what I'm saying and what I'm doing as being some type of postmodernist subjectivist. It's not that, I don't think that there's no such thing as absolute truth or anything like that in that way, which is, its own funniness, because, either you would have, there is some type of absolute truth, right? Which, would begin with that first statement, or you could potentially have, there is no such thing as absolute truth, except for the one statement that there is no such thing as absolute truth. So it means there is one absolute truth. Those are the only two logical constructs that can kind of come together. But even there, it's, we have some silliness with there, because again, as we talked about before, by virtue of having consciousness with which to act and think about it, presupposes that there's an existence of a consciousness with which to talk. Performatively, that's already another type of truth, that there is a type of existence that people can't escape. So I definitely do not consider myself a postmodernist or a total subjectivist. I just simply say that we're inherently tied to our subjective perceptions in trying to determine what is truth. And that has its pitfalls. It doesn't mean that we don't find truth or potentially do have truth, but we don't have the ultimate way to prove what it is. We don't have the ultimate way to say, okay, this isn't code in the matrix. I can't prove or disprove that, but I can say, okay, empirically, this is my book. You can see it. We can test it. We can burn it. We can look at the competition. We can use empirical evidence to say that this does seem to exist in this empirical form, and we can accept that. And we can act on that because we inherently do. We inherently live on those assumed premises, and it's just not possible to act otherwise. And people don't even want to. That's that's the funny part. People don't even want to act otherwise because unless they are going to just end their lives, which in that case, that's a whole different thing. That you get to that level where maybe you're so schizophrenic and you're like, oh, look at that. There's a nice a cat walking the street and it's a semi truck, and then they get smushed, and then that's that. You can't. You're not going to last too long if you can't determine the difference between a dangerous cliff and the door to a supermarket, right? If you can't determine the difference between what you think is a monster trying to kill you and it's just some woman asking for directions, right? If you're that disconnected from reality, you're going to be in trouble really fast. So, Silver says, because I like this is why I disagree with Per Bylandon. He says theory is primary, while assert perception and describing reality are primary. Oh, that's interesting. I'd like to maybe deep dive that sometime, but I definitely think that in terms of action and human action, I'm not sure if we're saying the same things here, but human beings, have to take in information before they can even process and describe reality, right? I mean, you can't describe reality or describe what you're seeing and saying and sensing until, of course, you have language to say it in language, but without having something put into your memory repository, right? If you start like a computer, like your brain, like a computer like that. If you have nothing on the hard drive, well, how do you talk about anything else? You have to put stuff on the hard drive before you can actually have some software on there, that operates things. So, yeah, describing reality is what objectivist epistemology is all about. Yeah, exactly. Well, describing reality is inherently a part of libertarian voluntarism. That's exactly what is what voluntarist libertarians are doing. They're just conceptualizing it within, of course, property rights. So, we're talking about reality for a purpose, labeling things within the realm of scarcity for the purpose of helping reduce conflict over scarce resources, not having people, stab each other, not having people take each other's stuff, thinking about what is real versus, what is maybe ephemeral. And that's the IP debate, right? And of course, those of you know me know where I stand on that with, Kinsella there. But that's where libertarian voluntarism is coming in to both describe reality for the purpose of helping people have peaceable relations and property rights. So, all right. Well, I appreciate y'all, coming on by. And again, if you just happen to come by late, make sure that you come on over to the youtube.com/Jack Lloyd, JACKLOYD. Make sure you get the notification bell clicked on, because I'd love to see you again if I do more videos talking about these ideas, because I love talking about philosophy. I love talking about libertarian legal theory. I love talking about ways to get people to understand these things better, consent better, because it isn't self-executing. People take it for granted. It's so frustrating. So frustrating that there's so many out there who just think that, libertarianism was always just popular, and people are always saying taxation is theft and abolish the IRS. Like, no, it took work like me and other people years of massive messaging and guerrilla, memes and tactics and propaganda and stuff like that. I mean, we're just seeing the precipice. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg of maybe what's possible, right? And Javier Milei, breaking all kinds of stigmas and thoughts of, that's never possible all at once. I mean, it's a whole different landscape out there now, with people actively engaging with libertarian ideas on a global scale. That's just unprecedented. The idea of anarcho-capitalism making it into mainstream news because of Javier Milei and of course a few others. Really, really good. So, all right, take care, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.